and good morning. I thought about protocols, but I feel like saying good morning, family, because I feel like I've become one of your family members. I think I'm adopted, if I'm not mistaken. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be here amongst you, because I believe that the discussions we have in this group particularly are very close to each one of our hearts. And they are discussions that are not simply rhetorics, but really tangible discussions that seek to transform issues and matters on the ground. And it's indeed again a vital honor for me to talk about something that I even feel a little bit kind of ill-equipped to speak about, but I couldn't dare say no to speaking about this, because I truly believe that change is possible in this on this topic, and I truly believe it can be transformational. So I dare to be brave and humbly accept this invitation. This is more than timely, and actually it's very urgent. Africa, a disclaimer, I want to say that I focused mostly on Africa. I know this is a global meeting, but I can't pretend to know what is happening in the other continents. I've never worked in the other continents, but I know also that Africa bears the biggest brunt of the debt, and so I focused my talk on Africa. Africa is facing a debt crisis of deep moral and developmental urgency. I think in the welcoming remarks, the sister mentioned this. This is now beyond just justice, it's actually becoming immoral. According to the recent data, Africa external debts has been rising. It's strange. I was looking at the data, and it shows that from 2013 to now, we've actually grown the debt for around 12%, and we are sitting at 25% of nation's GDP, which is, I think, kind of very crazy. And this public debt in Africa constrains government capacity. We know many other things constrains government capacity, but this particular debt, servicing the debt, constrains government capacity in investing in crucial sectors such as health, education, social protection that is more and more needed, and now the very relevant climate resilience infrastructure. In 2024, the interest and debt service alone amounted to 30% of government revenues, just servicing the debt, not even, in many of African countries, leaving fewer resources for other essential public services. This is no longer just a financial issue, it is, as we say, the justice issue. Most of the Secretary Generals of the UN constantly spoke about the debt, but none actually spoke as louder as the current Secretary General, who has been very vocal in addressing the inadequacy of debt relief, and saying that there should be actually debt relief, as this inadequacy could be a recipe for social unrest. We are seeing unrest in many countries, and these unrest are not necessarily just about the debt, but the debt compounds the issues, and probably even at the center, because most of the social unrest are based on issues of service delivery and access to basic rights across the continent. And I personally, as the UN Women Advisor for East and Southern Africa, I see how this debt burden disproportionately affects women and girls, and Sister mentioned that as well in her opening remarks, in her welcoming remarks, through cuts to public health, and then the shrinking of social spending, and the constrained fiscal space for gender equitable development. Now, this is also made even more urgent by the ongoing funding cuts that we are experiencing from donor countries. How has the UN responded so far? So the United Nations Office of the Special Advisor of Africa, in its flagship report in 2024, Unpacking Africa's Debt Towards a Lasting and Durable Solution, laid out a comprehensive diagnosis of the debt. It showed that the debt has climbed to 650 billion, and the debt service reached nearly 90 billion in 2024, crowding out investment in core social sectors, as I said. And again, UNDESA mentioned something else that we don't talk about often, which is the domestic debt. So together with the external debt, there's now also the domestic debt, which oftentimes is even more expensive than the external debt, and has highlighted that it's rising in many African countries and helps governments borrow in their own currency but at much higher servicing costs. We also see that the Secretary General has urged a more just system, more concessional financing, and stronger multilateral development banks and instruments that recognize vulnerability, not just GDP growth. So in lending, there should be a more social indicators considered, not only just lending. We also have in this, if we can take a cue, many of the regional development banks that should be probably more strengthened to actually take up the role of being the lender rather than resorting to more expensive private sector banks. There is also a reform agenda. The UN has urged a rethinking on the international and financial structure. There are 4 main points of this reform agenda. It has urged the rethinking on more affordable long-term concessional financing, as I mentioned, including capital increase for multilateral development banks, predictable debt instruments that link debt sustainability to development outcomes, not short-term yield and private financiers, strengthening domestic resource mobilization and debt management so that African countries reclaim greater fiscal sovereignty. Now, on this particular third point particularly, I am very passionate about, because so often we have claimed that we can't do without external debt. But we've seen in some of the countries, it still has to be documented and published, but in the West, in West Africa, for example, we are hearing how they are slowly addressing their external debt, and sometimes some claiming even to eradicating their external debt. So using domestic resource mobilization and using a better management of our resources to actually become debt-free ultimately. Engaging regional institutions, building Africa-led financial mechanism to reduce dependence on external, often volatile financing. And this, we've seen the many efforts done on the continent. We've seen both in the financing but also in trade, how the continent is striving to actually get regional architecture that can fund development rather than resort to external debt. So what must be our message at this G20 side summit? I always say that charity, in French we say that la charité bien ordonnée commence par soi-même, means charity that is well done starts by self. So I started by saying that we start by focusing on debt justice as being gender justice. High debt burdens disproportionately hurt women, reduce health and social spending, fewer gender equitable programs, and limited social protection for women and girls. So we must insist that any debt relief architecture be gender sensitive and aligned with gender equality investment. Global architecture reforms Global architecture reforms is not optional, it is essential. The current G20 common framework is a start, but by the Secretary General's own admission, it's not sufficient. We need more ambitious, more inclusive mechanism that prioritize development over short-term credit returns. We must expand concessional and predictable financing, and we must be part of the conversation around domestic debt, because domestic debt is often left out, and yet it's becoming more and more heavy on the government as well. Africa must speak also with one voice. We need actually these voices here must reach other voices, so become one big voice. A call to action would be G20 leaders and finance ministers to reform the debt architecture now, scale up concessional financing, recognize that debt is not merely a balance sheet. It is lifeline for millions of African women, girls, men and boys. Civil society and faith-based actors, we should keep pushing for debt justice. Our voices, especially those rooted in moral and ethical frameworks, have tremendous power, especially when they are united as one voice. The UN system is supporting these voices, and the UN system is supporting Africa-led proposals and Africa-led negotiations. And the UN system is also your partner, your technical partner in technical assistance for debt management that protects social investment. And African governments should actually strengthen domestic resource mobilization, improve transparency on debt, and deepen regional financial cooperation to reclaim fiscal authority. In closing, I should say that debt should not be a chain around Africa's neck. It's about time that it breaks. It must be a tool for liberation, a bridge for investment in health, education, gender equality, sustainable future, as well as a tool to address all the impending crises we get, such as climate and others. The UN stands ready to partner with African governments, civil society, regional bodies, and the G20 to build a financial architecture that is fair, resilient, and anchored in people and planet. May this summit and this session be actually a turning point where compassion, justice, and structural reform come together to give Africa the fiscal space it needs to thrive. And I thank you.